Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Okay, so you want to get to the heart of the matter, right? You want the important stuff without wading through endless news. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Today we're taking a deep dive into Donald Trump's comments after his recent phone call with Vladimir Putin.
Right. We've got these excerpts from an interview he did with Sky News Australia. So we're getting a firsthand account of how he sees this interaction.
Right.
And what we're aiming to do in this deep dive is to really understand the key topics they discussed.
Yeah.
How Trump interprets what was said, and the potential implications for, global relations, and especially when it comes to the situation with Russia and Ukraine.
Right. So let's jump right into this phone call, which Trump described as great. I mean, that's a loaded word, right?
It is.
He said it lasted almost 2 hours, and right away he starts talking about a lot of guns pointing at each other. So clearly he's concerned with de-escalation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he's calling the current situation foolish.
Yeah.
He even says that it wouldn't have happened, if he'd still been in office.
Right.
So he's very focused on this idea of a ceasefire.
Right.
But he seems to suggest that simply stopping the fighting, might not be enough without addressing the root causes of the conflict.
Right.
And something that really stood out to me was how he described the current military situation. He said that Russia has this advantage because they've nicely encircled about 2,500 soldiers.
Oh, wow.
So he's painting a picture of a very difficult situation for Ukraine.
Yeah, definitely. And you get a sense of urgency from him. He wants to get it over with.
Right.
And he makes sure to point out that no American forces are currently involved.
Right.
Which is obviously something a lot of people are focused on.
Absolutely.
But then in the same breath, he mentions the possibility of World War III if things escalate.
Yeah.
Which is, that's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
He also talks about working towards peace and that they discussed other things also. It kind of makes you wonder what else might have been on the agenda, given all the tension. What are the other big issues that might have come up?
Right. Well, considering the larger geopolitical picture, it's possible they talked about things like the future of security in Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe different ways to achieve peace, beyond just a ceasefire.
Right.
Perhaps the role of other world powers in all of this.
Right.
We don't know for sure without more details, but those are the kinds of high-level things that leaders typically discuss in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. There was this report that came out from Kremlin media saying that Putin demanded an immediate end to aid to Ukraine. What did Trump say about that?
Right.
Well, he was pretty clear about it. He said, and I'm quoting him again here, no, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid. Actually, we didn't talk about aid at all.
Huh.
So that's a pretty direct denial, right?
Yeah. He's directly contradicting that report.
Yeah. So why would there be this discrepancy? Why would those reports come out?
Well, it really highlights how confusing things can be in international relations.
Yeah.
One possibility is that Kremlin media is trying to control the narrative, trying to push a certain version of events for, domestic or international audiences.
Oh, really?
Or maybe there were just genuine misunderstandings or different interpretations of what was said during the conversation.
Right.
But regardless, Trump's denial is pretty clear.
Yeah. Okay, so if they weren't talking about aid, what were the main topics according to Trump?
No.
Well, he mentioned the possibility of improving the relationship between the United States and Russia. He said he saw that in a readout of the call. But then, of course, the big question is, can we trust Putin's intentions?
Yeah.
Especially considering Russia's increasingly close relationship with China.
Right. How do those dynamics usually play out in international politics?
Yeah.
Well, in international relations, the idea of a balance of power is crucial.
Yeah.
Historically, when two powerful countries get really close, it makes other countries nervous.
Right.
And a lot of analysts see the growing relationship between Russia and China since 2021 through that lens. But Trump actually addressed the China factor.
Yeah.
He said that President Xi also wants to get along with the U.S. So he seems to think that improved relations are possible across the board. He also contrasted the huge trade imbalance between the U.S. and China with the much smaller trade volume with Russia.
Right.
And he highlighted Russia's interest in expanding trade and mentioned that they have valuable resources, things like very big forms of rare earth. Of course, Russia has a huge landmass.
Yeah.
So he's hinting at potential economic benefits for the U.S. in a closer relationship with Russia.
So it sounds like he's looking at this from both a geopolitical angle and an economic angle.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about these closer ties between Russia and China. That relationship has really solidified since 2021.
Right.
How does that affect Trump's desire for a new relationship with Russia, especially considering that historically a strong Russia-China partnership has been seen as a challenge to U.S. interests?
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's complicated. Trump acknowledges that traditional view. He says the first thing you learn is you don't want Russia and China to get together.
Right.
So he understands that basic principle of international relations.
Right.
Trying to prevent any one power from getting too strong.
Right.
But then he downplays its current significance. He says it's not a big part of it right now, although he does admit it could become a bigger issue in the future.
Right.
And what's interesting is his explanation for why Russia and China got closer in the first place.
Yeah.
He blames the previous U.S. administration's energy policies. He argues that they forced them together.
Oh, wow.
And he calls it an unnatural alliance, given the demographics and geography of Russia and China.
Right. So he's saying that past U.S. policies inadvertently pushed these two powers closer.
Exactly.
And then he says the U.S. will try to be friendly with both.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a tough balancing act.
It does.
He also brings up China's dependence on trade with the U.S. again.
Right.
And he emphasizes that large trade deficit. It seems like he sees that as leverage in managing the relationship.
Absolutely. He's outlining a strategy where the U.S. tries to navigate these complex relationships by using its economic power and finding common ground where it can.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to another interesting point. Trump has been criticized for being a nationalist. Some people say that as a nationalist, he might have more in common with someone like Putin than with leaders who are considered globalist, or even with Zelensky. How does he respond to that?
Right.
Well, he addresses it head on. He says, I am a nationalist, but I'm for the United States, not for anybody else. So he's drawing a clear distinction.
Yeah.
He's saying his focus is solely on American interests. And then he immediately points to his record on Russia. He says, nobody's been tougher on Russia than me. And his main example of this is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Right. So the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is really important to him.
Yeah.
He talks about how his administration stopped its construction.
Right.
He calls it stone cold dead.
Right.
And he emphasizes that this was a major energy project that would have had big implications for both Russia and Europe.
Right.
He's also critical of the fact that the next administration immediately approved it. This is clearly something he's proud of.
Right.
And he uses it to push back against any suggestion that he's soft on Russia.
Right.
Interestingly, he also mentions something that Putin supposedly said to him.
Yeah.
Putin said, if you're my friend, I'd hate to see you as my enemy.
Wow. That's a pretty intense quote.
Yeah. What do you think he's trying to do by sharing that?
It's a powerful quote for sure. It seems like he's trying to show the kind of direct, even transactional relationships that he thinks are necessary in international diplomacy. And then he talks about his very good relationship, not just with Putin, but with President Xi and Kim Jong-un as well.
Right.
And he frames these personal connections as a positive thing.
Interesting.
But he emphasizes, again, that his ultimate focus is on the interests of the United States. So he believes that these personal relationships can be used to benefit America.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's suggesting that having open communication and even a certain level of rapport with world leaders,
Right.
even adversaries, is a valuable diplomatic tool
Yeah.
that can ultimately help the U.S. achieve its goals.
Okay. So to recap, we've explored Trump's account of his phone call with Putin, which he says lasted almost 2 hours. He denied that they discussed aid to Ukraine.
Right.
And we looked at his perspective on the relationships between the U.S., Russia, and China.
Yeah.
And his response to those criticisms about his nationalism and his relationship with Putin.
Right.
And this brings up some important questions for you to think about. What are the potential long-term effects of these perspectives on the future of international diplomacy, especially given the ongoing tensions in Eastern Europe?
Right.
How might leaders in other countries react to these viewpoints, especially as the global political landscape keeps changing? It's certainly a lot to consider.
Absolutely.
Given all the complexities we've discussed today, what other questions do you have about the balance of power between these major world players? We encourage you to continue exploring these crucial issues. There's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
All right, until next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.